Welcome, everyone, to the Observation Deck podcast, where we take a deeper look into the unknown. I am Captain Ron, and today I'm joined again by Hugh Newman. Hugh's a world explorer, a megalithomaniac, I love that term, and the author of several books on megaliths, crop circles, and giants. He's also the organizer of the Megalithomania Conference and various tours. He's going to be appearing again at this year's Contact in the Desert Conference from June 25th through June 28th. So, Hugh, you have Contact in the Desert coming up in just about a month. Let's start with your annual conference, the Megalithomania. That just finished a couple weeks ago. How'd that go?
We were kind of forced at the last minute to do it online. It became a bit of a kind of last minute thing, but yeah, because of the pandemic, we thought we were going to be able to do it live like we normally do in Glastonbury, but we ended up doing it online. It worked pretty well. I used the Zoom thing. It went really well. People will still actually catch up on it if they go to megalithomania.co.uk. You can actually watch the whole thing. We've been doing it since 2006. We've been at it a while, and we really liked. It has a lot of speakers who've actually kind of appeared at Contact in the Desert. A lot of speakers end up speaking at Contact in the Desert, so that's kind of a nice connection we seem to have there. Like Maria Wheatley, even Brian Forrest has spoken there. We've had Andrew Collins, Freddie Silver, Graham Hancock, all that crowd kind of thing. So it's been quite an interesting journey doing that every year. Being forced to go online this year was interesting in itself. And obviously, not being able to get out and about and do the tours that we normally associate with the conference has been a little bit frustrating, but that's all going to change slowly. So fingers crossed.
Your event also has this unique aspect in that you blend people from the academic community with those with the alternative views on this subject. How does that work out? Are there any fistfights or mayhem?
Well, it's actually surprisingly calm and polite, to be honest with you. There's no like, if you go to an academic conference, there's sometimes like kind of agendas that you have to kind of stick to, themes and things like that. We don't have that. We're very open, and we've set it up like that since day one to like bridge the academic with the alternative, because this subject needs it. The megalithic arts and sciences really needs this kind of thing, and so we kind of stepped in and kind of tried to do that. And now we get some of the top archaeologists in the world coming to speak, and they're alongside people talking about what some would suggest were kind of fringe or out there subjects, but actually it works. Everyone's cool, everyone's open-minded, everyone just listens to each other, and they don't have to believe everything each other says or agree with it, but it ends up actually being quite a fun kind of thing for people to view, because
there's a lot of people come from to actually talk about something. Sure. But I do hear a lot of guys come on here, Brian Forrester, Robert Schock, a lot of these guys, they run into archaeologists who are very resistant to some of these new discoveries, and they don't want to change their ideas at all. They don't seem very open to that. Is that what you've kind of found, or have you seen some things changing?
No, for sure. That has been one of these. I mean, one example of that is archaeoastronomy, like the study of how megalithic sites line up with the stars, sun, and moon. Right. And people like Alexander Thom, even since Norman Lockyer back in the 1920s, but Alexander Thom fundamentally in the 1950s and 1960s was putting this idea forward, and also the link with geometry and alignments of stone circles. And he was Oxford University engineering kind of academic, but he kind of really challenged the academia himself, and it took like 30 years for it to slowly be accepted into archaeology. So these ideas have like this 30, sometimes more, time span on them before they start to get accepted. And even things like ancient metrology, like ancient measure, like the megalithic yard, different lengths of the foot, and other things like this, which is another subject which has kind of got an academic kind of element to it, but it's often ignored. And like you get the same thing with like sophisticated geometry as well. And even earth energies, which is something I'm fascinated by, is now being tested by academics eventually, after years and years and years of geomancers and dowsers saying it didn't exist. But then you get people like John Burke came along with Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, his brilliant book from 2005, which really pushed that door open, because he was testing all these sites scientifically for earth energy effects and got results. And so you just got to keep pushing forward with if there are ideas that are good enough and they stand the test of time, you can keep pushing forward, you can keep reminding and kind of putting new books out and research, speaking at conferences, and eventually it gets heard if it's valid, if it's like if it's like
It
something
just
that's got some
feels
substance
such
to it.
glacial pace to me. Like it just takes forever. I know Robert Duvall and Graham Hancock had the pyramid thing with the stars, just like you were referring to, and that took them 20 some years to get across. It's incredible how slow these things are to change. That must be
I
frustrating.
agree. Yeah, I agree. It's one of these things. Yeah, it's the same thing with their theories as well, like the whole Orion correlation that Baval and
Yep.
Adrian Gilbert came up with. You know, it took a long while to have any kind of acceptance, but eventually, you know, you just got, if it's like I say, if it's a valid, good, strong argument, eventually you just keep plugging away at it, and it starts to get recognized, and it has to be accepted at some point. Ley lines is another one, you know,
Mhm.
and you know, things like this, which, you know, it's just a reality that isn't that difficult to accept, but because archaeologists, academics didn't come up with it first, they're not that keen on like kind of you know, having like laymen or, you know, like, you know, normal people who make discoveries as the sort of champions
Is that
of
what
these
you think it
discoveries.
is? Is that all it is? Just that they didn't because they don't have degrees or whatever? Is that what upsets these people?
It's a bit of that, yeah. I mean, a little bit of that, but also, you know, like you said, there's a rigid kind of paradigm, and which kind of got to be stuck to, and you know, and if that's sudden, you know, if it keeps changing, it becomes a pain because you've got to reprint all these books, change syllabuses of universities and teaching, all this kind of stuff. So I can understand it. You know, they want to stick to the plan, but modern technology like lidar scanning, new dating techniques is changing everything. And so and I think nowadays, I mean, we had like this brilliant guy called Mike Parker Pearson. He's a top archaeologist. He's done work all around the world. Stonehenge, he's been working on the bluestone quarry of Stonehenge in Wales for 10 years, and he's brilliant. I mean, you get people like him, he's a breath of fresh air, because he's making discoveries in the moment and then changing the archaeological digs plans to go with his new theories as he's discovering
Wow.
stuff, which is really, really kind of cutting edge. And he's like, and taken that on board. And you know, people like that are really, really need to be kind of listened to. And, you know, it's just a new way of doing things. And I think, you know, there's going to be changes taking place.
Sure, these guys and this new technology like lidar is incredible. I think a lot of people think that we've got these ancient sites and they are what they are. They discovered them 100 years ago, and that's that. But that's not true at all, is it? Right? There's new discoveries all the time. Was there anything revealed at your conference that was like a new, profound discovery that you found?
Yeah, there's quite a lot actually. It was trying to keep up with it all, you know, while I'm organizing and hosting it. It's like, whoa, you know. So I've been watching back the lectures, but yeah, I mean, there's people like I said, Mike Parker Pearson. His breakthroughs have found this direct connection with Stonehenge, but also Robin Heath spoke there, and he's a brilliant expert on Stonehenge. He's from the alternative side, but he's like, you know, he taught engineering at universities. He's like got this academic kind of brain, and he's like found all this massive geometries in the landscape linking Stonehenge with the quarry site, which got overlooked by the whole archaeological thing when this was all coming out a few months ago. But now it's starting to be recognized again. We had people like Martin Sweatman, who's made these breakthroughs on Göbekli Tepe, and all the carvings on Pillar 43 represent very ancient astronomical symbols, which is thousands of years older than accepted. He's an academic himself. He's like a professor, but he's been attacked by his own academics, you know. And so, you know, so there's a sort of mind, there's an opening of the mind in this study, I think, from all different perspectives, which is refreshing. And yeah, Megalithomania at the conference itself, we try and, you know, get the latest kind of research in, get the people coming to talk about that. And there was certainly this guy called Ross Broadstock, who, my God, I mean, he's basically worked with this genius called Alan Wilson for years, who we're all big fans of, and he's basically decoded Egyptian hieroglyphs and worked out that they're based, if you know, do it correctly, they're based on the ancient Cobrin or Welsh language, and there's this strong connection with the Welsh language which has been completely overlooked.
This
And
is
they've come in
amazing.
with their brilliant genius brains and kind of put this together, and it stunned everybody at the conference, because suddenly reading hieroglyphs is easy if you know how. You know, it's all
This is
very kind of
incredible.
intuitive. and it's not based upon the whole Rosetta Stone translation. That's kind of got faults with it, and so that was major. That kind of blew everyone away. And so you got things like that with Alan Wilson and Ross Broadstock, Martin Sweatman, Robin Heath, Mike Piker. But yeah, so there's a lot going on, and I know some of the speakers at Contact in the Desert have got some new cool stuff to present as well. I know some of them myself.
Looking forward to that. But that's an incredible discovery. I did see a story about that, how they can decode the hieroglyphics now. That is amazing. That's another landmark thing that's moving everything forward. I think it's
absolutely.
You know, I noticed on your YouTube page you have this. You recently posted a Necromantium in Greece, that temple, which is the ancient temple dedicated to the god of the underworld, Hades. What an incredible place. There's all these giant blocks, and they have this polygonal stone construction walls that are amazing. They're intricately put together where they have these giant rocks on an angle and the other one fits in. It seemed reminiscent to me of places like in Cusco, like what's that, Sacsayhuaman or something like that in Cusco, South America. And those even seem melted together. How do you think they achieved this? This is an incredible design.
Yeah, I mean, all over Greece and Italy, actually, and Albania and a few other places, there are these gigantic polygonal or cyclopean walls, which are identical in style to ancient Peru. It's astonishing. I mean, myself and JJ, my partner, we've been traveling to Italy and Greece quite a lot and other places to kind of check these out, and they're amazing. And no one knows about them. They're just not talked about. There's a whole bunch in southern Turkey as well, and a few other places, and they're just not talked about. Everyone talks about the ones in Peru, but technically, you know, officially regarding the archaeological dating, these are older than the ones in Peru. Wow. These go back to at least the 8th century BC. There's some dating that goes back 7,000 years potentially. And so there's a possible Neolithic Bronze Age origin, and they're always connected with the Cyclops or the giants of the ancient Eastern Mediterranean, which fascinates me because in legend, they were like the metallurgists, the builders, the stone workers. They could soften stone, manipulate it. They became like the elite megalith builders of their generation. And these were kind of real, this was based upon a real kind of group of people who were building these sites because they're immense. I mean, even Delphi, the famous oracle site, has got polygonal walls, which are much older than the main site. And no one talks about that. I'm just like, what? When I went there, I was like, oh my God. And absolutely. So some of them are like Necromantium are like puffy polygonal, like you find in Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, really similar. If you just took random photos of certain walls in Greece and put it against random photos in Peru, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference because they're just the same exact style. So whether there's some earlier master civilization that was teaching this and sharing it around the world, whether it was just a remarkable coincidence, which is unlikely, I don't know, but there seems to be some cross-cultural kind of pollination going on with it, with these great ancient cultures. You could build these walls.
Yeah, I do think it's sort of under the radar too. People don't talk about it or are as amazed by it as you and I are, because I think it's incredible. I still don't know how they did it, which brings me to, I wanted to ask you, you've seen these different kind of constructions that seem almost impossible to me. I don't know how they did these things. Certainly given their age, you're talking about possibly 7,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe, we're talking about maybe 12 or 13,000 years ago. What site have you visited that seemed the most incredible to you? Like it's stuck in your head. You just can't figure out how it could have been done, like Ollantaytambo or Baalbek or where? What's
yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm like a sort of kid in a toy shop when I go to any site, even if it's one standing stone in the middle of a field that's 4 foot tall. And so I get quite blown away by most places because, we research where we go. But I think you look at the sites in Italy and Greece. I mean, they absolutely stunned me. I mean, I couldn't believe the immensity of the stonework and the quality, and yet no one's talking about it. I mean, they've got dating on this. It's like a polygonal pyramid called the Hellinikon in Greece, in the sort of near Argos, near one of the main ancient capitals there. And when I saw that, I couldn't believe it. Why aren't people talking about this? It's like a pyramid, but built a polygonal construction, and they've done sonoluminescence dating it to nearly 3000 BC, which pushes the dates back of all the sites in Greece of that style as well now. But I've recently been traveling in Mexico. We managed to get a few months exploring Mexico. I've been there many times before. And I'm obsessed by the Olmec culture, but we were decided to have a good look around the Yucatan, like the kind of classic Mayan area. Now, the Maya are a fascinating culture, but I'm an Olmec obsessive. I actually got my Olmec t-shirt on. I'm not sure if you can see that. Yeah, but we were looking at some sites in the Yucatan, and there's seriously megalithic construction and supersized pyramids, like almost the size of the Great Pyramid. And no one talks about it. There's a place called Izamal, for instance, which is the second largest pyramid in Mexico. Cholula's the largest. That's the largest one in the world. That's near Mexico City. And yet it's got like these gigantic 30-ton blocks all around the base with multiple other constructions in the vicinity. And I'm wondering, what the hell is this? Why is no one talking about this? Again, it's the same. It's not necessarily polygonal or anything like that, but it's got this immensity, this megalithic kind of secret going on there. So I was pretty blown away by sites like that when I visited Mexico.
I feel the exact same way you do, Hugh. I don't understand why the lead story on the news isn't something like this. I mean, yeah. I don't, like you said, one little 10-ton rock. How do they move it? You know what I mean? It would be such an achievement 7,000 years ago, let alone stacking them up in this perfect pyramid. I don't know why it's not as popular as it seems worthy of to me. I want to move on to your other favorite topic, which you just alluded to, which is giants. You have a new book coming out. I literally think like this week or any minute, right? It's coming out right away. The Giants of Stonehenge in Ancient Britain. There's a lot of legends and creation stories in religion, medieval chronicles, and even oral traditions that recount this convergence of giants being an integral part of the founding of the British Isles. Have you uncovered any new insights into the realities of giants and the possible existence?
Yeah, we've got a ton of stuff. We have got so much. I think it's going to be quite mind-blowing actually for people, because we take it for granted. We're like been researching this for years now. There's our first draft copy of the book.
Oh, nice.
It's going to be out. Me and Jim Vieira is a co-author. It's got Jim on the back there as well. That's going to be out soon. We're aiming to have it out officially for the summer solstice, which is 21st of June. Nice. So that was just before, I think, the Contact in the Desert. Yeah, so we'll have a special kind of edition available at the very early stages, like limited edition and all that kind of stuff, numbered and signed kind of thing. But yeah, the Britain. I mean, we've done that book on America a few years ago, Giants on Record, and that we couldn't believe how much we found, and we could only put a very small amount of what we discovered in that book. We put 250 giant accounts. We have over 1,000 for America. Britain, there's not so many. It's a much smaller country, mind you. It's the size of like Texas or something, isn't it? And so we've gone deep into the research. We've gone into the extremely ancient records going back over 1,000 years, 2,000 years, some of them. We've had to get stuff translated from Latin and Welsh and things like this. And we've got a dynamite book. I've got to be honest with you. We are astonished how many we found. We've found several hundred accounts. Some of them are huge. We've got ones near Stonehenge, which are like 9'4". We've got another one just outside Stonehenge, which is like 14 foot 10 inches. These accounts, and finding the skeletons is a whole different story. But we've actually got a couple of museums, a couple of things we're following up on where you can actually see some of the bones of some of these skeletons. And we know some of them were definitely on display. And we've got this, one of the strangest things is that all these legends we find in Britain, the founding of Britain with Brutus, he battled Gog Magog, the giant, down in Cornwall. We've got the fact that they were then taken to the Guildhall, and now they're the giant protectors of London. And these giants are still, models of them are still paraded around London every year. There's a giant called St. Christopher in Salisbury, which is still on display in the museum just down the road from me. And it's like 18 feet tall. And that's been paraded around Salisbury, right near Stonehenge, the nearest town to Stonehenge, for like 600 or 700 years. Wow. And St. Christopher, who he became known as, which he was a giant, and he was actually like the Canaanite Nephilim type giant from the Bible lands, who came over, and he carried Jesus on his shoulder to cross a river. That's what he's famous for, and he's like the patron saint of like travelers. And so, what's a Canaanite giant doing, being paraded around the nearest town to Stonehenge for 600 or 700 years? So we're looking at all these different things. There's lots of very strange connections, and lots of bones and skeletons we've found, and lost kind of mythologies that actually encode geomantic, like like ley lines and surveying techniques within their stories, as well as astronomical mythologies actually encoded within the myths associated with these giants. And often the place where the myths are kind of strongest, where you find the bones and the skeletons. And so it just gets weirder and weirder the more you look into it. But there's like this direct connection between the megalithic sites and these giants. I mean, Stonehenge, as an example, the first name ever recorded of Stonehenge, which goes back 1,000 years, was the Giant's Dance. That was the name given to Stonehenge before it became known as Stonehenge, which is a later Saxon name. And so you got things like this that people aren't even aware of. And then
could be the stones, though, right? They could mean the giant stones, couldn't they?
No, the original was in Welsh, and the translation is I think a Quia Gigantum, which actually translates as the dance of the giants, or the giants dance. And so with Stonehenge, the Saxon name, means like hanging stones or something similar, where they're kind of hanging like lintels on top of the stones. That was a later Saxon name. But yeah, I mean, that's just tip of the iceberg. But we've been putting this together. We decided to spend an extra bit of time on this, and the more time we gave it, the more research, the more kind of revelations kept occurring. And it's fascinating for me because there's this connection between these ley lines, these earth energies, and this astronomy and this geomancy, all within these stories of the giants. It's all encoded, and they spread worldwide as well. There's like an influence coming out from Britain. And we've looked into the DNA. We looked into like the Denisovans being connected even with Britain, the Solutreans, these 20,000-year-old giant travelers moving around Europe. We've even got stories of Native Americans coming over thousands of years ago to this country, and maybe the giant DNA partly came from there. And I mean, there's a lot of different angles we could get into, but obviously that's my main lecture at Contact in the Desert, so I'll be updating all that there.
Cool. Well, this is an area where I'd say there's a clash between mainstream archaeology in academia and some of the alternative views that are coming from you guys, because I feel like I hear from yourself and Jim Vieira and some other people that we have found giants and they're real, and we have all these accounts, and I understand there's accounts, but I feel like we also hear from mainstream archaeology that there is no such thing. So do we in fact have any giant bones?
We do have a few. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch that were on display. There's different parts of the world. It depends where you look. We know that in America, for instance, there was NAGPRA came with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which came in 1990, and that removed the remaining giant bones and skeletons that were on display. And we know they're on display. We have photos of them. We have archaeological reports of them being dug up by sometimes Smithsonian archaeologists and anthropologists. The same thing applies to Britain, but it goes back even earlier, because there's almost like it's just something going on where they don't want giant bones and skeletons to be known about. This is just something that's going on here. We know a guy, this filmmaker, who was approached by an archaeologist back in like 2004, who said, the archaeologist phoned him and said, look, we found this 10-foot skeleton near Stonehenge, but we don't know what to do about it because the BBC won't let us actually put this in the documentary they've commissioned with this dig. And like, we were like, what? I mean, I couldn't believe it when he told me this, but he said, yeah, no. And they were, eventually it got completely covered up. We can't find anything about it now. He never got to see the skeleton, but he was like, this was one of the, I can't give names, but he was one of the top archaeologists at the time. And there's no way he would make that stuff up. And we've got, we know there are some skeletons on display. We've got a couple, there's one up in North, up in Yorkshire. We've got a 7.5-foot skeleton, I think, on display up there. There was the Charles Byrne Irish giant. He was on display. We have bones that were hung up in pubs and even in the Guildhall in London that were like these giant thigh bones that are on display. We have skulls that were on display in a museum in Cumbria, which would have been someone as tall as 10 feet tall. And so there's plenty of documented evidence. It's just trying to locate the bones themselves where the real problem is lies. But we think we've got enough to convince people there's a story there to investigate, and we're trying to get some TV company to work with us, because having something like that behind you gets you access to things. So we're looking at trying to get a documentary made alongside the book at some point.
Well, you surely have the story. There's no question about that. I mean, it's in legend. We just talked about it's in the Bible. It's in all these other places. But I feel like they've proved or accepted that we had this Gigantopithecus or something. I think it's called Gigantopithecus, because they have like one jawbone and a molar, very little evidence, yet they completely accept that we had this creature. Can't we just find one giant bone somewhere, run the DNA on it, and then prove that this is real or not and end this?
Yeah, no, I mean there is proof. It's there. It's just not accepted. You know, they don't want it. It doesn't want to. It's not accepted into society, into mainstream archaeology, things like that. The proof is there. The test won't ever get done.
What's the resistance? I don't understand why they wouldn't. If you have the proof, have a DNA evidence, why is it not getting?
Yeah, tell me about it, man. Tell me about it. I wish I knew. I mean, we don't really go into like the conspiracy side of it too much in this book, but we did in the last book quite thoroughly, because of the Smithsonian definitely covering things up in North America. And so we kind of, in this book, we're like looking more at the links with megalithic sites, the mythology, and the fact that there's these reports of these skeleton skulls and everything in these areas. And there's so many. It's just crazy how many there are. And these are academic people reporting this and measuring it and things like this. But yeah, I mean, we were approached by someone in, I think, Arizona, California area, who claims he has giant bones on him. We went to look at them. They look like skull fragments and teeth and bones of a giant human being. And it's right near a really rich area of giant discoveries. And so we're going to get that tested at some point. But, you know, like you said, in the historical record, we have giant human beings like the very early Cro-Magnons going back 44,000 years up until about 10,000 years ago, were often up to 7 feet tall. And these were they're who we're descended from. Yeah. Before that, you've got Homo heidelbergensis down in Europe and also South Africa. There's been bones and skeletons that are routinely over 7 feet tall. One of them is probably 10 feet tall. This was actually at a university. And this was pronounced online on a video by Professor Francis Thackeray of this university in Johannesburg. And so there's a lot going on in the much more ancient past. We have the Denisovans as well. The giant teeth and bone fragments they found prove they're probably up to 9-10 feet tall. And so yes, it's there. It's all in the historical record. It's just not kind of recognized as such. And so this is why we kind of get fascinated by this. But it's especially the connection with these ancient megalithic sites, which really gets us. I mean, why are they connected with them? There must be something going on.
Clearly, if I would say that somebody's probably thinking that one of the explanations for these giant megalithic constructions is that, in fact, they were made by giants. Therefore, it would have been much more plausible to move these giant rocks if they were 10 feet tall. You can imagine, I mean, maybe not some of them, but, you know, to some degree, they would have more ability than we would.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's actually been tests done on that where, you know, if you take someone who's actually like 7 or 8 feet tall, their strength multiplies much more so than you would imagine. You know, often like double.
Exponential, sure.
Yeah, it's really quite something when you get imagine like someone who's 10 feet tall doing that. But there's recorded giants in the last few hundred years in a place called County Antrim in Ireland, and there's a whole spate of giants. You know, in modern times, up until a couple of hundred years ago, were being born there, and like for some reason, there's an area which has this rich kind of thing. And this is reported on in academia. Like they don't understand why it happened and why it's happening. But that's exactly where, if you were coming from America, you would be landing, you know, and like, so the giant genes may have spread either way, because we found sites in America which almost identical. It's something that J.J. Ainsworth and myself and others have been looking at, is this connection with Winnemucca, this site in Nevada, where they found these giant petroglyphs are identical to ones in Ireland at La Creux and Newgrange and other sites like that. And these are all got giant connections, giant myths and stories attached to both of these sites. And also in that part of America, you have these fair-skinned, red-haired, Irish-style giants that are kind of in the kind of historical record and the mythology, called the Saiti Ka, amongst other things. And so, yeah, there's so much going on with this. It's kind of crazy.
Have you had a chance to look at the Michael Tellinger stuff from South Africa? Because he claims he's got bones that could be 20 feet taller even. Have you looked at any of that stuff? What do you think of that?
He's into the, I know Michael, yeah, he came and visited us a couple of years ago. He's into the mud fossils thing. We don't really talk about the mud fossils in the book, because it's really hard to like kind of gauge if they're really human bones or not. And there's not so much of that in Britain, to be honest with you. So we didn't really go into that, but I'm aware of it, and it's staggering if there's truth to it. But I know Michael, he introduced me to the stuff I mentioned earlier, the Homo heidelbergensis thing down in the university in Johannesburg, where they've got this thigh bone, which is huge, and it's like double the size of a standard thigh bone, which goes back 200,000 years. And so the mud fossils thing didn't really apply to our research, but I'm sure there's something in that needs another look.
I certainly love when the mythology or legends that are associated with a site are supported by some empirical evidence, because that gives it even more credibility where it ties into how this happened. What do you feel right now at this point? I know you've mentioned some different specimens that are out there. What do you feel is the strongest evidence to prove that giants existed here? That they weren't just some fluke humans that grew abnormally large or whatever, that there was actually a race? What's the strongest thing you can point to?
Well, if you're looking at like kind of large groups like that, I think North America is the place to look for that, and the evidence is there more than anywhere. In Britain, it's much more localized. There's smaller amounts. There's traditions in Wales which are very strong, and hundreds of accounts from that particular area, discoveries and other such things. But in North America, there's known tribes of Native Americans, and their kind of elite kind of leaders would be in smaller groups, and they were often the giants, and they would often breed between themselves with other tribes and maintain their giant genes for generation after generation. This was written about, this was known about, this is in the oral tradition of many tribes. Ross Hamilton, a good friend of ours, our mentor, has told us a lot about
too,
that.
right? Doesn't he do the mounds?
He does, yeah. This is all to do with the mound culture sites in North America, really. And so he's done a lot of work with that. And he was good friends with Vine Deloria Jr., who was a Lakota elder. And he's a remarkable guy, but he spoke about the same kind of things. Matter of fact, he spoke to all these elders that on their last legs, who are like 100 years old. Some of them were 130 years old, things like this. And he got all the stories from them. Ross followed up with that. And the evidence is there in the traditions, even in the DNA, you can find that there were giant groups living in North America. And so the same principles apply everywhere. I mean, we're focusing on Britain because we found so much good stuff here. And it's my homeland, obviously. But there's a whole worldwide phenomenon, and it's everywhere. And it's just one of these fascinating things. It's just, it's there. I mean, there's tribes of giants in the Bible, the Canaanites, there's loads of different named groups and individuals who are battling each other. There's been skeletons and bones found there. And it makes you really wonder, why the hell isn't this known about more publicly? It's quite an amazing story.
What do you think it's going to take to do that, to push it to public? What do you think it's going to take? Is it going to have to be like a discovery that they find a 12-foot person? And do you think it's out there? We just haven't found it yet.
Well, you know about the story of the Kandahar Giant, yeah? Afghanistan. I mean, there's some truth. I'm sure there's some truth in that. I've been listening to various people talk about that, and some of the original so-called discoverers and friends of theirs and colleagues of theirs in the military. And they said, yep, this really happened. Yeah, there's a 12-foot red-haired giant killed one of our men, tried to attack us all. We managed to take it down. We smuggled it back to America, la-di-da. And so what do you make of that? Why isn't that out in the news? It just isn't ever going to be. And so, if that's for real and that's not getting out in the news, then nothing will do. So Amazing. We're going to keep pushing away, just keep plugging away. I don't know why
they bury this kind of stuff if that's in fact what's happening. It's hard to say. I don't see what's the downside.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm baffled. We ask as many questions as we answer when it comes to like trying to get this. This is why we do it. We just want to kind of, get everything together, get it all in a book. Then it's out there forever. People can then look at it, they can add to it. We're just going to keep plugging away at it. But but what we find really interesting is the connections with megalithic sites, the fact that these so-called giants were like elite groups in Britain as well, who were the master builders. They were like the ones who had the knowledge. They're the ones who formed these societies, later became known as the Druids. And so these elite, very tall leaders weren't just savages. They weren't just like kind of cannibals, as you get in a lot of myths. There's a whole other dimension, almost like they were kind of had this higher state of consciousness that they were working with. And for some reason, that was one of the sort of genetic traits of these giants. And I think that's what's overlooked. And I think that's what we found in North America when we did our research there. And we're finding the same thing here, that often that they were the master surveyors, they were the master builders, they were the ones who did all the astronomical alignments over hundreds and thousands of years of observations. And they were the ones who were just ingrained with this kind of way of living, whereas normal humans, we don't really have that so much. There was like a kind of different mindset, different genetics. And I think this is, this actually goes back to the Watchers and the Anunnaki of the Bible lands, because that's what they were all kind of being taught. These are the civilizing qualities they brought to the world back then. And so that may have spread from there, coming over to here. And we actually got evidence of them being in Britain, which we go into in the book, which is mind-blowing in itself.
Well, there's no question that just the sheer volume of accounts you guys have been able to uncover, that alone, even without the physical evidence that I'm waiting for, is fantastic. I mean, you've got a lot of different accounts in all different places of the world that are very similar, and that's compelling in its own right to some degree, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of physical evidence that we've got a huge amount of photographs before NAGPA took them away in North America. We've got archaeological reports, measurements. We've got people who had them on display. We've seen some what we believe are giant bones, like I mentioned, in California and things like this. So there is stuff going on. And there's several places in Britain we've seen actual evidence, which we're going to produce in the book. And so it's just a case of like, people just don't believe it, even if they see it sometimes. And so this is the problem. So we're not worried too much about producing tons of physical evidence. What we want to do is, because we're having such trouble finding, we've only got such a limited resource for that we're just given the accounts as we found them, and people can make up their own minds if they think they're complete hoaxes or not. But we're going to put them all together and say, look, take a look for yourself. And the fact is, we've got this myth that talks about giants in this exact area these bones were found. Why is that there? That myth's probably been around for 5,000 years.
Yeah, I just don't think they were doing pranks 5,000 years ago about something like that. It just doesn't.
Yeah, I know. This is what I mean. And when people actually look at what we've put together, especially in Wales, it's a really strong place for this. Then they'll see what we mean.
So what are you going to specifically be talking about at Contact in the Desert this year? Is it specifically the giants and these new?
Yeah, we're doing the main lecture. I'm doing the main public lecture is the giants of Stonehenge in ancient Britain, and I'm going to be looking at what we've talked about, but I want to be giving some mind-blowing examples, but also some connections. And so, especially the connection with the Bible lands, which I don't want to give away too much, but there's like this whole thing with Enoch may have come over to Britain and been involved with the Watchers in building certain sites. And we've got kind of strange circumstantial evidence for that, which is like, whoa, how can that possibly be? But it makes sense. And we're also going to be looking at in Ireland and the Fomorians, the Tuatha De Danann, the Firbolg, and the Lost Lands, where in tradition, these giants were said to have come from, often linked with Atlantis, but actually there's other lands like Ternanog, Ogia. There's off the corner, the southwest corner, we have Lyonese, which is the lost land of Lyonese, and other places like Hyperborea as well, which are mentioned in the Greek myths, where all the giants live, and that's thought to be northern Scotland and so forth. So there's a lot going on with that. I think I'm doing a workshop on like the megalithic origins of Mexico. Mentioned it briefly, the origins of the Maya and the megalithic origins, but specifically the Olmecs and this earlier megalithic building culture, and a group of giants there who were called the Quinametsin giants. So that's going to be the workshop looking at all these different things. It's a huge subject. We're working on a next book. Me and JJ are going to be working on a book about that next. I think my workshop is the intensive is going to be on earth energies and crop circles, looking at the kind of energetic forces that are involved in this and the science that's now starting to back that up. So they're the three main things I'm going to be kind of discussing.
We're running out of time. I just want to quickly ask you about that. I know you talk about crop circles a little bit as well. Have you seen any recent discoveries or anything that moves that forward at all?
Yeah, well, there's two crop circles in Britain right now. I've been to both of them, filmed them and everything. But the problem is nowadays, it's actually tough because there's tons of hoaxers making them. They call themselves land artists and so forth. Respect to them. They're like continuing the tradition. But when you look into the history of it and going back 20, 100,000 years, there's actually a prehistory of crop circles that weren't made by people and hoaxers. And there's actually like really crazy kind of mythologies and fairy lore associated with them, as strange lights and phenomena, which I'm going to get into in my kind of intensive, because people don't realize there are hundreds of crop circles going back to the early 1900s all the way back to the 1500s and earlier, potentially. So again, that's what fascinates me. There's actually a prehistory, and they're often associated and found near these ancient sites as well. So what the hell is going on? I mean, was Stonehenge built on a crop circle when it formed 5,000 years ago? What's going on?
Right.
Are these sites directly connected? And actually the main work that was done on crop circle, the scientific work, was by John Burke. He's the guy who wrote Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. And his research on the crop circle and the bent nodes and the blown nodes and the way that the crop grew more strongly the following year in the same place the crop circle appeared the year previously. He realized there was some profound energetic effect, and he applied that to the stone circles, and he found the same thing going on. And that's how his research reached a whole other level. And this is very scientific, but he was finding that with them as well. So there is a connection between the two, and there's something I'm going to get into in the intensive. But there's kind of new research coming out, but it's really hard to decipher this. The people who make them now are so good at them. It's really hard to know if they're real or if they're like man-made. And so I've kind of given up on trying to work that out, and I'm just focused on like the historical aspect, because there's so much that's not being revealed yet. And I think there's, when you look into it from that perspective, and you talk, there's people from the 1930s from near where I used to live in Cambridge who were like reporting strange swirls of blue light and strange almost like psychedelic effects on their brain while they were watching it. They go out in the field, there's a big crop circle there from the 1930s. And so, there's things like this, which are often overlooked. There's a UFO connection with crop circles as well. They're called used to be called saucer nests. That was their kind of the names they were first given when they kind of came out.
Interesting. Well, thanks, Hugh. This is always interesting stuff. You have such great insights. We really appreciate all the efforts and research that you've done into these topics too. It's really great. It's fascinating stuff. Hopefully it'll continue to grow, because I think the whole world needs to know about these things. Thank you everyone for listening. You can see Hugh you can find him at Megalithomania.co.uk. You can find me at theobservationdeck.com, and we'll see you at this year's Contact in the Desert event on the 25th through 28th of June. Thanks again, Hugh. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. Have a good night.